Welcome to our noon edition of Arirang News. Here are the stories making the headlines at this hour. The government has notified doctors who have still not returned to their posts that their licenses will soon be suspended. Police have also started summoning top former and current executives of the Korean Medical Association. Starting with the spokesperson of the KMA Emergency Committee, Chu Soo-ho, who arrived questioning earlier this morning. Consumer prices in the country climbed back up to the 3% range last month. Statistics Korea attributed the rise to agricultural product prices going up and unstable oil prices. It's Super Tuesday in the States, the biggest day nationwide for primary elections before the actual presidential election in November. Voters in 15 states and 1 territory are choosing who they want to run for president. As of now, it looks like we'll be seeing a rematch between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. The government is rolling out administrative and legal actions against trainee doctors who continue to defy orders to return to work. Meanwhile, police summoned the spokesperson of the Korean Medical Association's Emergency Committee for questioning earlier this morning, marking the first of 5 scheduled questionings. Shin Se-byuk starts us off.
The government on Wednesday is continuing its administrative measures against trainee doctors who have not returned to work in defiance of a return-to-work order. Tuesday saw the start of disciplinary action against approximately 7,000 trainee doctors. The health ministry had gathered evidence of their non-compliance during a 2-day on-site inspection of 100 major hospitals on March 4th and 5th. The government began sending out preliminary notices about the administrative processes facing these doctors. Following the issuance of notices, doctors will have a 2-week period to submit their defenses through written statements. Should administrative actions be upheld, their medical licenses will be suspended for 3 months. The health ministry is also mulling over whether to file a criminal complaint with police against some junior doctors who led the massive walkout, but the exact details have not yet been decided. Trainee doctors in South Korea began walkouts on February 20th against the government's planned increase in the medical school admissions quota. As of 8 p.m. on Monday, more than 90% of resident doctors, around 8,900, were still absent from their post nationwide. Amid continuing disruption to medical services, 5 major hospitals in Seoul, including Seoul National University Hospital, said they are exploring the possibility of merging wards to enhance the efficiency of patient care. With the medical system being restructured to focus on patients with critical or emergency needs, there is a plan to treat patients with less urgent conditions in a single ward, much like the approach taken during the COVID-19 pandemic. Other hospitals across the country are also considering either not operating certain medical departments or merging wards. Meanwhile, police on Wednesday summoned Chu Soo-ho, spokesperson of the Korean Medical Association Emergency Committee, for questioning. Last Tuesday, the health ministry lodged a formal complaint with police against 5 officials from the KMA, accusing them of multiple offenses such as violating medical laws and disrupting operations. Following this, police investigators conducted searches at the offices of these 5 officials and the KMA's Emergency Committee to collect related evidence, while also imposing travel restrictions on the officials, preventing them from leaving the country. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
Inflation in South Korea went back up above 3% on year in February. Back in January, the figure had dropped into the 2% rate for the first time in 6 months. To try bringing consumer prices down, officials held a meeting with related ministers looking for better measures. Our Park Gun-woo with the details.
Consumer prices in South Korea once again rose by over 3% on year last month, mainly due to higher prices for agricultural products and unstable oil prices. According to data released by Statistics Korea on Wednesday, the country's consumer price index, a key gauge of inflation, rose 3.1% in February compared to the same month a year ago. Consumer prices reached 3.8% on year in October. That was followed by consecutive monthly decreases until last month's jump. Prices for agricultural products, energy, industrial products, and services were all up on year in February, with agricultural products and energy mainly driving the overall increase, rising 11.4% and 4.9% respectively. And with consumer prices remaining high, Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok spoke about ways to tackle the issue at an economic meeting held with related ministers on Wednesday morning.
The government will do its very best to bring consumer prices to the 2% range as soon as possible by taking the recent rise seriously.
He said the government will provide 60 billion won, or roughly $45 million worth of support for discounts on agricultural, livestock, and fishery products in March and April, dropping the price of major food items, including apples and pears, by 40 to 50%, lowering tariffs on imported fruit, monitoring prices by item daily, and continuing inspections at gas stations were other ways he said would be used to address the situation. While saying ingredient prices have dropped by about half compared to highs seen in 2022, he added companies should lower the prices of products accordingly, just as they did to raise them when ingredient prices got higher. Park Gun-woo, Arirang News.
South Korea's foreign reserves fell slightly in February. Data released by the Bank of Korea on Wednesday shows that the country's foreign exchange reserves, a barometer of its financial stability, came to over $415 billion at the end of February. It was down by $30 million from the previous month, marking the second straight month that foreign reserves have fallen. Korea's central bank attributed the fall to the dollar index, which climbed 0.6% last month against major currencies, subsequently lowering the value of non-dollar assets. And as of the end of January, South Korea is the world's 9th largest holder of foreign reserves. President Yoon says investments in young people give some of the best bangs for the buck. His remarks came at a policy discussion to empower young people, where he has promised to expand the national scholarship program and tax breaks for childbirth incentives. Our presidential office correspondent Kim Do-yeon has more.
The South Korean government is expanding its national scholarship program so that 1.5 million college students will be eligible, up from the current 1 million. That's more than half of slightly more than 2 million enrolled college students. The announcement came as President Yoon held a policy discussion in the city of Gwangmyeong in Gyeonggi-do province on empowering young people.
먼저 청년들이 희망을 가질 수 있어야 나라의 미래도 열어갈 수 있습니다. 청년들이 걱정 없이 공부하고 일하며 꿈을 키우고 미래를 준비할 수 있도록 하겠습니다.
In addition, work-study programs will expand. By 2025, 200,000 students will be able to participate. And a new, quote, housing scholarship will provide students with up to 2,400,000 Korean won annually. That's about $1,800. The government will also open up the Youth Leap account to more people. The savings account is for 19 to 34-year-olds earning up to 60 million won or around $46,000, allowing savings of up to $38,000 after 5 years with an interest rate of 6%. The income limit will increase to include more people.
그야말로 재정 투자를 했을 때 투자 효과가 엄청나게 큰 겁니다. 그야말로 청년들에 대한 이런 약간의 투자는 그야말로 돈 되는 장사다 이 말입니다.
President Yoon also emphasized direct involvement of young people in shaping government policy, saying they're able to see the world fairly and just. Meanwhile, it wasn't just about the opportunities, but it was also about the struggles, including single mothers struggling to receive child support from their former husbands.
Especially if the introduction of the advanced payment system is introduced, the state will pay child support up front and then ensures that it be collected from the non-custodial parent. I believe it's important to instill a sense of responsibility in non-custodial parents towards their children.
This was President Yoon's pledge during the campaign, and an official from the Ministry of Family answered that relevant ministries are shaping practical measures to make this possible by the second half of next year. Also at the discussion, the government announced that it will not be taxing the childbirth incentives being given by private companies. This is an ongoing effort by the private sector to tackle the current low birth rate. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
South Korea's Navy and Marine Corps servicemen are participating in this year's multinational joint exercise, Cobra Gold, in Thailand. The exercise includes the joint training of around 40 elite recon personnel from South Korea, the U.S., and Thailand. It also involves maximizing operational capabilities in how to fight and survive in jungle environments. Also included in the Cobra Gold exercise were humanitarian activities such as building school buildings for local children. The South Korean Marine Corps said Wednesday that the servicemen will return home on March 17th. Seoul and Washington have named their chief negotiators to start a fresh round of talks on splitting the bill for the U.S. troops stationed in South Korea. Our Peunzi takes a look at why the appointment comes unusually early for a pact that would usually take effect in 2026.
South Korea has appointed a veteran diplomat as the chief negotiator for a new round of talks on defense cost sharing with the U.S. Lee Tae-woo, who previously served as the consul general in Sydney, will lead the country's delegation consisting of relevant authorities from the ministries of Foreign Affairs, Defense, and Finance. The team will hold talks with a U.S. delegation led by Linda Specht, a senior advisor and U.S. lead negotiator for security agreements at the State Department.
I feel the heavy weight on my shoulders, but I will do my best to ensure that a rational level of defense cost sharing is achieved to provide a stable stationing environment for the deployment of U.S. forces Korea, an essential element of combined defense posture between South Korea and the U.S.
Since 1991, South Korea has been shouldering the costs needed for U.S. troops to be stationed in Korea, including labor, logistics, and construction costs. The two countries have regularly held talks on how to share these costs, and the upcoming talks will be the 12th. The most recent deal was signed in 2021 and will be effective until the end of next year. With almost 2 years left before it expires, it's unusual for the two countries to begin negotiations again. This is widely seen as a move aimed at reaching an agreement before the possible re-election of former U.S. President Donald Trump, who during his presidency had accused South Korea of free riding, demanding it pay as much as $5 billion a year. But the foreign ministry has denied the speculation, saying early preparation has nothing to do with the election in November.
There have been cases in the past where defense cost-sharing talks took a considerable amount of time. Considering these circumstances, a representative has been appointed to allow sufficient time before the next round of negotiations.
More than 28,000 American troops are currently stationed in South Korea as part of efforts to deter North Korea's nuclear threat and to strengthen combined readiness. Peunzi, Arirang News.
Millions of Americans are currently casting ballots on one of the most important dates on the U.S. political calendar, Super Tuesday. Voters from 15 states and 1 territory are selecting who they want as their presidential candidate for November. It seems most likely that President Joe Biden will have a rematch with Republican lead Donald Trump. Choi Min-jung reports.
March 5th is Super Tuesday over in the U.S., the biggest day of the 2024 presidential primaries or caucuses. Projected results are rolling in as President Joe Biden and his predecessor Donald Trump dominate the Democrat and Republican contests.
I think we really need somebody, a super strong figure in the White House for international relations.
He's a fraudster. He's been accused of sexually abusing a woman and found guilty of that. He's got over $500 million worth of fines and penalties.
According to AP projections, both Biden and Trump are expected to win their respective primaries in Texas, Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Oklahoma. Meanwhile, Trump's only rival in the Republican nomination race, former U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, is widely expected to drop out of the race with defeat to the former president looming. Super Tuesday usually offers a glimpse into which candidates will run in the final race for the White House. But as the projections show, there's much less suspense this year. Tuesday's results are only likely to intensify the rivalry between Biden and Trump as they head towards a rematch in the general elections in November. On Super Tuesday, voters from 15 states and 1 U.S. territory are choosing their presidential candidate, with the largest number of states voting on the same day in the presidential primary calendar. California and Texas, the most populous states in the U.S., are among the 15 holding the nominating contests. Over a third of the total delegates, which are awarded to the most popular Republican and Democratic candidates, are up for grabs. Meanwhile, on the big day, Facebook, Instagram, and other Meta platforms suffered an outage spanning multiple countries, including the US, the UK, and Canada. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
China is also going through a politically important time of the year. During an annual parliamentary gathering, officials set the country's economic growth target for this year at around 5%. Analysts have described this figure to be ambitious amid challenges facing Beijing, including a sluggish property market and weak investor confidence. Chung Eun-ju with more.
China has announced an ambitious 2024 economic growth target of around 5%, in line with analysts' expectations, while promising steps to transform the country's development model and defuse risks fueled by bankrupt property developers and structural imbalances. Chinese Premier Li Qiang delivered his government work report on Tuesday at the annual meeting of the National People's Congress, the country's annual parliamentary gathering. Li spoke of the challenges while citing the global economy and regional tensions as hurdles for China's recovery, as well as domestic issues such as low consumer demand and a challenging labor market. There was no timeline or concrete details for the structural changes China intends to implement. The 5% target is in line with last year's goal, which was notably restrained as China emerged from 3 years of strict zero-COVID measures, which impacted the economy. According to official statistics, China's GDP grew by 5.2% in 2023. But independent economists estimate that the actual growth rate to be lower. The International Monetary Fund projects that China's economy will grow by 4.6% this year. Li also flagged higher defense spending while hardening the rhetoric on Taiwan and dropping previous mentions of peaceful reunification. Budgetary plans included an increase in defense spending by 7.2% this year, similar to 2023. Li acknowledged the targets would not be easy and said that high-quality development remained the priority. Investors are closely watching this year's meetings, known as the two sessions, of the National People's Congress and the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, for clues on how President Xi Jinping plans to tackle the slowing economy. A spokesperson for the NPC revealed on Monday that Li would not give a press conference at the end of this meeting in a break with precedent. Chung Eun-ju, Arirang News.
The price of Bitcoin, the largest cryptocurrency by market cap, reached a new all-time high on Tuesday. Many remain optimistic that the cryptocurrency may reach even more new highs, driven by its spot ETF approval. Lee Seung-jae with more.
The price of Bitcoin continues to soar, this time reaching an all-time high on Tuesday. According to U.S. crypto exchange Coinbase, the price of one Bitcoin hit $69,225 as it surged 4% in 24 hours. That meant the largest cryptocurrency by market cap surpassed a previous record of $68,990 set in November 2021, before profit-taking led to prices falling below $60,000 at one point. Still, Bitcoin has surged 160% since last October and has risen more than 40% in February alone. Bitcoin has also gone up nearly 400% since November 2022, when it plummeted to the $16,000 range due to the collapse of the Terra USD and Luna, as well as the bankruptcy filed by virtual currency exchange FTX. Bitcoin's all-time high was largely driven by the U.S. regulators' approval of the spot exchange-traded fund and large-scale capital inflow through it. In January, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission approved 11 spot ETFs applied by BlackRock, the world's largest asset management company. According to Bloomberg News, since the introduction of the Bitcoin ETF, the net inflow through BlackRock and Fidelity Investments amounted to $7.35 billion. But also driving up the prices is the Bitcoin halving in April. With the total supply of Bitcoin set at 21 million, of which 19 million have already been mined, once the split occurs, the rewards given to miners will also be reduced by half. Some economists say that the easing of sentiment toward risky assets, the New York stock market hitting an all-time high, and the expectation that the U.S. Fed will cut interest rates all contributed to Bitcoin's rise and may continue to push its prices higher. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
3 days of negotiations with Hamas over a ceasefire in Gaza have failed to make a breakthrough. This comes less than a week before Ramadan, which had been the informal deadline for a deal. Yoon reports.
International mediators from the U.S., Egypt, and Qatar have been in negotiation with Hamas for a ceasefire in Gaza. The mediators have been trying to come to an agreement where Hamas would release Israeli hostages in return for a 6-week ceasefire, the release of some Palestinian prisoners, and more aid to Gaza. But the 3 days of negotiations failed to make a breakthrough on Tuesday. This comes less than a week before the start of Ramadan, the Muslim fasting month, which had been the informal deadline for a deal. Israel has demanded Hamas hand over a list of captives who are alive, as well as the captive-to-prisoner ratio it seeks in any release deal, to which Hamas has said the group did not have information on which captives were alive or dead. They also said the captives were being held by numerous groups in multiple locations. At a press conference in Beirut on Tuesday, senior Hamas official Osama Hamdan said that his group wants a permanent ceasefire rather than a pause and a complete withdrawal of Israeli forces.
We reiterate that what the enemy failed to achieve on the battlefield, he will not achieve at the negotiating table. The security and safety of our people will not be achieved except with a permanent ceasefire, the end of the aggression, and the withdrawal from every inch of the Gaza Strip. Providing urgent and appropriate shelter and bringing aid to our people in Gaza is our top priority, and any exchange of prisoners cannot take place before all this is achieved.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has publicly rejected such demands, pledging that the war would go on until Hamas is dismantled and all the captives are returned. Israel did not send a delegation to the latest round of talks due to Hamas not providing the hostage list. With the fasting month of Ramadan, which starts on March 10th, Hamas negotiators agreed on Tuesday to stay for at least one more day of talks. Palestinian-Israeli violence has spiked during Ramadan in previous years, creating a strong incentive for leaders to reach a deal before next week. Yoon, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at the latest news in the world now. The chief of the Kremlin's Foreign Intelligence Service said Tuesday that Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny died of natural causes when asked about whether any forces in the West had been involved in the death of Vladimir Putin's most prominent opponent. Russian spy chief Sergei Naryshkin said sooner or later life ends and people die, adding that the vocal reactions in the West to Navalny's death were revolting. The head of Ukraine's defense intelligence said in February that Navalny died from a blood clot, denying speculation that he was killed while in prison. Navalny died last month at the age of 47 in an Arctic prison. His supporters alleged he had been murdered. The Kremlin has denied involvement in his death. Tesla's European gigafactory in Germany's capital Berlin has halted production after a fire broke out at a nearby power pylon. Police investigations are being carried out with the suspicions of a possible arson attack. Local media had published a letter claiming responsibility for the suspected arson attack from the website of a far-left militant group called the Volcano Group. Emergency services have extinguished the blaze and power to the surrounding communities has mostly been restored. The outage and shuttered production are expected to cost Tesla hundreds of millions of euros. Over 100 illegally trafficked poisonous frogs have been released back into the wild in Colombia. Bogota's Ministry of the Environment oversaw the relocation of the endangered toxic frogs from the Colombian capital back to their rainforest habitat. Last month, a Brazilian woman had been caught at an airport in Bogota trying to smuggle the frogs into Brazil. According to local police, the endangered species is sought after in international markets by collectors who pay up to $1,000 per frog. Choi Ji-hee, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. It's a cloudy and wet day for many parts of Korea. It won't rain much, but those on the East Coast and Jeju Island need to keep an umbrella handy today. However, mountainous regions in Gangwon-do need to brace for more winter storms, with up to 8 centimeters in the forecast. A heavy snow advisory was lifted this morning, but do stay on high alert. We had a tad chillier start to the day, then highs are going up similar to yesterday in central regions, topping out at 11 degrees Celsius here in Seoul and over in Daejeon. Meanwhile, southern provinces have highs going 1 to 5 degrees higher than yesterday, and it will get cloudier as the day goes on. Meanwhile, parts of Jeju and the south coast are under a strong wind advisory. Haven't we had enough of wet and cloudy days? Well, more wet and cloudy weather is in the forecast for tomorrow in central parts of the country. Sunnier conditions return just in time for the weekend, but along with spring cold. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That's all we have for you today. We'll bring you more updates at the same time tomorrow.